My name is Morgan. And this is my story. It began like any other day. Mundane and ordinary in the way we take for granted. I was riding my bike through the quiet back roads, enjoying the cool morning breeze and the sound of birdsong. It was my sanctuary. A time to clear my mind before diving into the tasks of the day. The hills were gentle, the roads peaceful, and everything seemed just as it should be. Until it wasn't. The truck came out of nowhere. A flash of white. The screech of brakes. And then nothing. No pain. No fear. Just a disorienting sense of falling before the world went dark. I thought maybe that was it. The end of my journey. But then I opened my eyes. And I was somewhere else entirely. If you believe in God and near-death experiences, subscribe to Life at NDE today. Discover inspiring messages from God through powerful near-death stories that bring hope and understanding. Hit subscribe now and join us in spreading the light of faith. At first, I thought it was a nightmare. I was standing in the middle of a city. But it wasn't like any city I'd ever known. The buildings were broken, leaning precariously like they'd been battered by some monstrous force. Fires raged unchecked, filling the air with choking smoke. The sky above was an angry shade of orange, as if the world itself was burning. And the people were running, screaming, and crying, their faces etched with terror. I tried to call out, to ask what was happening, but my voice was swallowed by the cacophony. It was chaos. The kind that shakes you to your core. I've seen news reports of disasters and wars, but nothing could have prepared me for this. It felt too real, too immediate, like I was truly there, living it. Then I saw them. Soldiers, marching in formation, their movements precise and calculated. But these weren't our soldiers. Their uniforms bore foreign flags: Chinese, Russian, and others I couldn't recognize. My stomach twisted at the sight. This wasn't some far-off war, this was here, on American soil. My mind raced, trying to comprehend how this could be happening. The landmarks were familiar, the street signs unmistakable. This was my city, my home. And it was under siege. The soldiers weren't alone. There were others with them. Traitors from within, guiding and assisting them. It was a betrayal so deep it left me breathless. I didn't have time to dwell on it, though. My instincts kicked in, and I started moving, dodging debris and flames as I followed a crowd of terrified people. The air was thick with the acrid stench of smoke and the metallic tang of blood. Every step felt heavier, like I was wading through the weight of the world's despair. As I ran, I saw a family pinned beneath rubble. The parents were trying desperately to shield their children, their faces masks of fear and determination. Without thinking, I moved toward them, waving my arms and shouting for help. But before I could reach them, everything went black again. I don't know how long the darkness lasted. It felt like an eternity and an instant all at once. When I opened my eyes again, the scene around me had shifted. The chaos was still there, but now it felt closer, more personal. I wasn't just an observer anymore, I was part of it. That's when I realized this wasn't a dream. This wasn't my mind playing tricks on me or some fleeting nightmare. This was something more. I didn't understand it yet, but I knew deep in my soul that I was being shown something. A glimpse of a future that wasn't far off. A warning of what was to come. And it terrified me. The air was heavy, thick with smoke and despair. Everywhere I looked, destruction stretched as far as the eye could see. Fires raged unchecked, consuming anything in their path. The sounds of war echoed through the streets, The deafening roar of explosions. The staccato rattle of gunfire. And the anguished cries of those caught in the crossfire. It felt as though the world itself was collapsing. And I was standing in the heart of its ruins. I began to move. Not out of courage but sheer instinct. My legs carried me through the wreckage as I tried to make sense of the chaos. People were everywhere. Running. Stumbling. Falling. Their faces were masks of fear and desperation. I caught snippets of their cries, pleas for help, prayers for salvation, and anguished screams for loved ones lost in the crowd. It was overwhelming. A symphony of human suffering that threatened to drown me. Then I saw her. A little girl. No older than 8 or 9. Standing frozen in the middle of the street. Tears streaked her dirt-smeared face as she clutched a stuffed animal to her chest. She looked so small. So fragile. In the midst of the devastation. My heart clenched. And without thinking, I moved toward her. "Hey!" I called softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's going to be okay. I'll help you." She turned to me. Her wide eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. She didn't say a word. But when I held out my hand, she hesitated only for a moment before taking it. Her fingers were cold and trembling. A stark contrast to the heat radiating from the fires around us. As we moved together, I became acutely aware of the dangers surrounding us. Soldiers were everywhere, sweeping through the streets with mechanical precision. Their uniforms were adorned with the same foreign flags I'd seen earlier. They moved with purpose, their faces hidden behind masks that only added to their menacing presence. They weren't just soldiers, they were hunters, methodically searching for those who resisted. I kept the girl close, shielding her as best I could as we navigated the chaos. My mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. We couldn't stay in the open, that much was clear. But where could we go? The city was a maze of destruction. Every street more dangerous than the last. I needed to find shelter. Somewhere we could hide and regroup. That's when I spotted a group of people huddled in an alleyway. They were a motley crew: men, women, and children. All wide-eyed and desperate. I approached cautiously, not wanting to startle them. "We're not a threat," I said, holding up my hands. "We just need a safe place." One of the men, a grizzled older fellow with a bandana wrapped around his head, nodded warily. "Get in here. But keep quiet," he whispered. "They're sweeping the area." The girl and I squeezed into the group, pressing ourselves against the cold brick wall. The air was tense, every breath shallow as we listened for the sound of approaching soldiers. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a reminder of how fragile our safety was. Whispers spread through the group as people exchanged bits of information. Someone mentioned how the invaders had taken control of communication networks and power grids, leaving the city in darkness and isolation. Another spoke of drones equipped with surveillance technology, sweeping the streets like mechanical predators. It was a calculated attack, designed to sow chaos and dismantle resistance before it could even begin. "They've been planning this for years," the man with the bandana muttered. "We were blind, too focused on our own lives to see the signs." His words struck a chord, a bitter truth that settled heavily in my chest. I'd always believed in the resilience of our nation, the strength of our people. But now, faced with the stark reality of our vulnerabilities, I couldn't ignore the cracks in the foundation. The sound of boots on pavement snapped me back to the present. Soldiers were close, their voices low and clipped as they communicated. The group fell silent, holding their breath as the tension became almost unbearable. I tightened my grip on the girl's hand, silently praying that they wouldn't find us. The moments stretched on, each second an eternity. Finally, the footsteps began to fade, and the group exhaled in unison. But the relief was short-lived. We all knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The city was crawling with soldiers, and it was only a matter of time before they found us. "We need to move," the bandana man said. "There's a resistance camp in the industrial district. It's not far. But we have to be careful." The group murmured their agreement, and we began to move as one, sticking to the shadows and avoiding open spaces. The girl stayed close to me, her trust in me an unspoken bond that gave me a sense of purpose. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I had to protect her and everyone else in our ragtag group no matter what. As we made our way through the darkened city, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The chaos, the destruction, the fear, it was all part of something much larger. A storm that was just beginning to unfold. And I was caught in the middle of it. A reluctant participant in a vision that felt all too real. We barely made it across the open streets. Every shadow felt alive. Every sound a prelude to discovery. The girl's small hand in mine anchored me, reminding me that failure wasn't an option. I could feel her trembling, but she stayed silent, her wide eyes darting between the group and the dangers around us. The bandana man, Robert, led the way. His movements were deliberate, his eyes scanning for threats. He seemed to know these streets, or at least how to navigate them under pressure. We followed him through alleyways littered with debris, past storefronts with shattered glass and looted shelves. The city had become a ghost of itself, its heartbeat replaced by the cold, mechanical rhythm of occupation. "This way," Robert whispered, gesturing toward a narrow side street. "We'll cut through here." The group hesitated. The street was darker than the others, its end obscured by smoke. But there was no other choice. We moved cautiously, the silence between us a fragile shield against the chaos outside. Halfway down the street, we heard them. Footsteps, steady and deliberate, echoed from behind us. My heart leapt into my throat as I turned to see the silhouettes of soldiers emerging from the smoke. They hadn't seen us yet, but they were close, too close. "Run!" Robert hissed, his voice barely audible but urgent. We broke into a sprint, the girl's hand slipping from mine as she struggled to keep up. I scooped her up without thinking, her weight light against the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The group scattered, each person darting in a different direction. I followed Robert, trusting his instincts. As the soldiers shouted behind us, we turned a corner and found ourselves in a dead-end alley. Panic surged as I realized there was nowhere to go. Robert cursed under his breath, his eyes darting around for an escape. "Up there," he said, pointing to a fire escape. "Climb." I hoisted the girl onto the ladder first, her small hands gripping the rungs as she climbed. Robert followed. And then I. The metal creaked under our weight, the sound threatening to give us away. Below, the soldiers entered the alley, their flashlights sweeping across the walls. "They're here," one of them said, his voice cold and mechanical. "Search the area." We froze, clinging to the fire escape as the soldiers moved beneath us. The girl's breathing was rapid, her small frame trembling against the metal. I placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, willing her to stay calm. The soldiers lingered, their flashlights casting long, jagged shadows. One of them approached the fire escape, his light tracing the ladder. My heart stopped as the beam passed over us. But the soldier seemed to miss us, his focus shifting elsewhere. After what felt like an eternity, they moved on, their voices fading into the distance. We climbed the rest of the way in silence, emerging onto the rooftop. The view was both breathtaking and devastating. The city stretched out before us, its skyline marred by smoke and flames. The sounds of chaos below were a constant reminder of the danger we faced. "We can't stay here," Robert said, his voice low but firm. "The resistance camp isn't far. If we keep moving, we can make it before dawn." I nodded, though doubt gnawed at me. The girl's trust in me was unwavering, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leading her into more danger. Still, there was no alternative. We had to keep going. The journey across the rooftops was precarious, each step a test of balance and nerve. We moved quickly but carefully, the girl clinging to me as we leapt from one building to the next. The city below was a labyrinth of destruction, its streets patrolled by soldiers and drones. Every movement felt like a gamble, each moment a fragile thread holding us together. Finally, we reached the edge of the district. Robert gestured toward a cluster of industrial buildings in the distance. "The camp's there," he said. "We're close." But the path ahead was far from safe. Between us and the camp lay an open stretch of ground, exposed and vulnerable. Soldiers patrolled the area, their movements methodical and precise. Drones hovered overhead, their lights scanning the ground like unblinking eyes. "We'll wait for the patrols to pass," Robert said. "Then we make a run for it." We huddled behind a crumbling wall. The girl nestled against me as we waited. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one a test of patience and resolve. Finally, Robert signaled, and we moved as one, darting across the open ground. My heart pounded as we ran, the girl's small hand gripping mine tightly. We reached the other side just as the drones turned back, their lights missing us by inches. The entrance to the camp was hidden, a narrow passageway concealed behind a collapsed building. Robert led us through, his steps confident despite the darkness. The camp was unlike anything I had expected, tucked away within the ruins of an industrial district. It was a network of makeshift shelters, hidden passageways, and gathering spots that seemed almost alive with activity. People moved with a determined energy, their faces hardened by the horrors they had endured but resolute nonetheless. This was more than a hiding place, it was a base of operations, a beacon of hope for those willing to fight back. Robert guided us deeper into the camp, weaving through narrow corridors and past groups of people poring over maps and scribbled notes. The air was thick with tension, but there was a sense of purpose here, a quiet defiance that was almost palpable. I clung to that energy as I held the girl close, her trust in me anchoring my own wavering resolve. "This is Maya," Robert said, introducing a tall woman with piercing eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She was clearly in charge, her presence commanding respect. "She's the one running things here." Maya's gaze swept over us, lingering on the girl before settling on me. "You brought more than just yourself," she said, her voice sharp but not unkind. "Good. We need everyone we can get." I hesitated, unsure of what to say. We were just trying to survive." I finally managed. "We didn't know where else to go." "Well, you're here now," Maya replied, turning back to a map spread out on a table. "And if you want to stay, you'll have to contribute. This isn't a place for spectators." Robert placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Don't worry," he said. "Everyone finds their place here." As the hours passed, I began to see what he meant. The camp was a fragile ecosystem, each person playing a role to keep it functioning. Some were strategists, their minds sharp and focused as they planned the next move. Others were runners, darting in and out of the city to gather supplies or relay messages. There were even teachers, doing their best to maintain a semblance of normalcy for the children. But what struck me most was the sense of unity. These people came from all walks of life: doctors, mechanics, artists, students, and yet they worked together seamlessly. Their differences set aside in the face of a common enemy. It was a stark contrast to the fractured world outside. And it gave me a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we weren't completely lost. Maya eventually called a meeting, gathering everyone in a large, dimly lit room that served as the camp's command center. She stood at the front, her presence commanding attention as she addressed the group. "We've managed to hold out so far," she began, her voice steady but urgent. "But the Alliance is tightening its grip. They're cutting off our supply lines, infiltrating our networks, and turning our own technology against us. We can't afford to sit back and wait for them to crush us." She gestured to the map behind her, marked with symbols and lines that I didn't fully understand. "We have a plan," she continued. "It's risky, but it's our best shot. If we can disable one of their communication hubs, we'll not only disrupt their operations but also buy ourselves some time to regroup and strengthen our defenses." The room buzzed with murmurs as people absorbed her words. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. The idea of actively fighting back was both exhilarating and terrifying. I wasn't a soldier, and I had no idea how I could possibly contribute to such a mission. As if sensing my hesitation, Maya turned to me. "You're new. But that doesn't mean you're useless," she said. "What did you do before all this?" I was a pastor," I admitted, feeling out of place among these hardened fighters. "I'm not sure how that helps here." Maya's expression softened, just slightly. "People need hope," she said simply. "They need someone to remind them why we're fighting. You may not see it now, but your role here is just as important as anyone else's." Her words stayed with me as the meeting continued, my mind churning with a mix of doubt and determination. Could I really make a difference here? Or was I just fooling myself, clinging to a role that no longer mattered in this broken world? As the camp prepared for the mission, I found myself drawn to the girl I'd saved. She stayed close to me, her presence a constant reminder of what was at stake. She still hadn't spoken much, but her trust in me was unwavering. I couldn't let her down or anyone else who was counting on me. That night, as the camp settled into an uneasy quiet, I stood on the edge of the rooftop overlooking the city. The fires still burned in the distance, their glow casting an eerie light over the ruins. The air was heavy with the weight of what lay ahead, and I felt a profound sense of responsibility pressing down on me. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for something deeper, something that went beyond the chaos and destruction. It was a fight for hope, for unity, for the chance to rebuild what had been lost. And I knew, deep down, that I had a part to play in it, whether I was ready or not. The camp bustled with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. Every corner seemed alive with preparation, people moving swiftly as they armed themselves, packed supplies, or shared hurried instructions. It was clear that the mission to disrupt the Alliance's communication hub was more than just a plan. It was a last-ditch effort to claw back some semblance of control. Maya approached me as I stood by the edge of the camp, watching the activity with a mixture of awe and dread. "You're coming with us," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "We'll need everyone we can spare." I nodded, though the knot of fear in my stomach tightened. I had no idea what I could possibly contribute, but the thought of staying behind felt worse. The girl I'd saved was staying with the camp's remaining defenders, and her quiet, trusting gaze as I prepared to leave left me with a heavy sense of responsibility. She didn't say anything, but her small hand tugged at mine before I left. Her unspoken plea echoing in my heart, "Come back." The group heading out was small but determined. A mix of hardened fighters and reluctant recruits like me. Maya led the way, her confidence a steadying presence as we navigated the darkened streets. The city felt even more oppressive at night. The shadows deep and the air heavy with the scent of smoke and ash. Every sound seemed amplified. Every movement a potential threat. As we approached the target, the reality of what we were attempting began to sink in. The communication hub was heavily guarded, its perimeter patrolled by soldiers and drones. The building itself loomed like a fortress, its windows dark but its purpose clear. This was the heart of the Alliance's operations in the city, and breaching it would be no small feat. Maya gathered us in the shadows of a crumbling building, her voice low but firm as she laid out the plan. "We'll split into 2 teams," she said. "One will create a diversion to draw their attention. The other will move in and plant the charges. Once the hub's down, we regroup at the extraction point." I was assigned to the diversion team, a role that felt both terrifying and strangely fitting. I wasn't a fighter, but I could be a distraction. As we moved into position, my heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would give us away. The others with me were calm, their movements precise, their focus unwavering. I envied their composure. The signal came, and chaos erupted. Explosions and gunfire shattered the night as our team launched its attack, drawing the guards' attention away from the main objective. I found myself shouting, running, and dodging as the soldiers returned fire. It was a blur of noise and movement, my survival instincts taking over as I tried to stay out of harm's way. Through the chaos, I caught glimpses of the other team moving toward the hub. They were swift and efficient, their progress a stark contrast to the mayhem surrounding me. For a brief moment, hope flared in my chest. Maybe this could work. Maybe we could actually pull this off. But then the drones appeared. Their mechanical whirring was a chilling sound, a reminder of how outmatched we were. They moved with unsettling precision, their lights cutting through the darkness as they targeted our positions. One by one, the members of our team were forced to scatter, the drones relentless in their pursuit. I found myself alone, pressed against the cold brick wall of an alley as the drone's light swept past. My breath came in ragged gasps, my mind racing as I tried to figure out what to do. The sound of gunfire and explosions was distant now, the chaos spreading further from the hub. Then I saw it. One of the soldiers had fallen, his weapon lying just a few feet away. I didn't think, I just moved, grabbing the weapon and turning back toward the hub. The others might be gone, but I couldn't leave without knowing we'd succeeded. The main entrance was unguarded, the soldiers having rushed to deal with the diversion. I slipped inside, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The hub's interior was a maze of machinery and wires, its purpose unmistakable. This was the nerve center of the Alliance's operations, and it was humming with activity. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I kept moving, my grip on the weapon tight as I navigated the labyrinth of equipment. Then I saw Maya. She was crouched by a control panel, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the screens. She looked up as I approached, her expression a mixture of surprise and relief. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. "I couldn't just leave," I said, my voice barely audible. "Is it done?" She nodded, holding up a small device. "The charges are set. We need to get out of here before they blow." The urgency in her voice spurred me into action. We moved quickly, retracing our steps toward the exit. But as we reached the door, The sound of approaching soldiers stopped us in our tracks. Maya cursed under her breath, her eyes darting around for another way out. "This way," she said, pulling me toward a side corridor. The narrow passage led to a service exit, but it was blocked by a heavy metal gate. Maya worked frantically to open it, her movements precise despite the urgency. Behind us, the sound of footsteps grew louder. The soldiers were closing in, their voices sharp and commanding. I turned, raising the weapon as they appeared at the end of the corridor. My hands shook, but I held my ground, firing in their direction to buy Maya more time. The recoil jolted through me, the noise deafening in the confined space. I wasn't aiming, I was just trying to keep them back. The soldiers returned fire, their shots ricocheting off the walls. Maya finally got the gate open, grabbing my arm and pulling me through. We ran. The explosion came moments later, a thunderous roar that shook the ground and sent a wave of heat and debris through the air. The force of it knocked us off our feet, and I landed hard, the weapon clattering away as I hit the ground. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the sounds of the city returned, muted but persistent. Maya helped me to my feet, her face streaked with dirt but her eyes alight with determination. "We did it," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around us. "The hub's down." We made our way back to the extraction point, the journey slow and cautious. The streets were eerily quiet, the Alliance's response to the explosion delayed but inevitable. When we reached the camp, the mood was somber but resolute. The mission had cost us dearly, but it was a victory nonetheless. The girl ran to me as I entered, her arms wrapping tightly around my waist. Her presence was a balm, a reminder of why we were fighting. I looked around at the faces of those in the camp, their expressions a mixture of grief and determination. We'd struck a blow, but the fight was far from over. That night, as I sat by the edge of the camp, the weight of the vision began to press down on me. The chaos, the destruction, the resilience of the people, it all felt like a message, a warning of what could come. And as I gazed out at the city, the fires still burning in the distance, I felt a profound sense of purpose. This wasn't just about survival. It was about hope, about finding a way to rebuild in the face of unimaginable loss. And while I didn't have all the answers, I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't turn away from what I'd seen. This vision, this glimpse of a possible future, was a call to action, one that I couldn't ignore. The edges of the vision began to blur, the city fading into a haze as the sounds of the camp grew distant. I felt a pull, a sudden jolt that brought me back to the present. My eyes opened, and I was on the ground, the bike lying a few feet away. The air was cool and quiet, the chaos of the vision replaced by the stillness of the early morning. I sat up with a gasp, my heart pounding as though it might burst from my chest. The room was eerily still, bathed in the faint light of dawn filtering through the curtains. But inside me, a storm raged. My mind reeled as I tried to process what had just unfolded, a vision so vivid that it eclipsed the boundary between reality and dream. Every detail was etched into my memory with unrelenting clarity, and the emotions it had stirred with it. For a moment, I sat frozen,